Alright, for number 4, we're back to just combining like terms. Alright, 2 plus 6, that's going to give us 8. And then a positive 4i and a negative 1i, that's a positive 3i. Number 5, here we have the distributive property. So that's going to make negative 6. And then negative 2 times 2i is going to make negative 4i. Alright, number 6. Be careful when you are subtracting and you have more than one term, because you have to treat this like a negative 1 that must be distributed. So negative 1 times 2, that's negative 2. But then negative 1 times negative I, that's going to be positive I. So be careful with that. Meanwhile, this part, I'm just going to bring it down, 7 minus 5i. Now we can combine like terms again. So the 7 and the minus 2 together, that's going to make 5. Alright, and then the negative 5i and the positive 1i, that makes negative 4i. When you have a binomial times a binomial, you have to FOIL it, but I like to think of it as just doing the distributive property twice. So 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times I is I. Alright, and then we also have to distribute the negative I. Negative I times 1 is negative I. Negative I times negative I, alright, a negative times a positive is a negative. I times I is I squared. Now remember, I squared is equal to negative 1. Alright, keep that in mind. So, combining like terms right here, I have a positive I and a negative I. Those are going to cancel each other out. That's 0i. So far that means I have 1 minus I squared. But I squared is negative 1. So that's 1 minus negative 1. Minus a negative is addition. So this is really 1 plus 1. So the final answer will be 2. Alright, this is back to subtraction. So be careful. This is like having a negative 1, which must be distributed. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. Negative 1 times 10 is negative 10. So I'll have negative 10i. Meanwhile, this part over here, I just bring it down. So that's going to be 6 minus 6i. Okay, so like terms. I'll have my 6 and my negative 4. That makes 2. And then I've got negative 6i and negative 10i. That makes negative 16i. Alright, so once again we need to do a double distributive property, or FOIL, whichever you want to call it. So we're going to take this 4 and multiply that by both of these. So that's going to give us, well, 4 times 3 is 12. And then 4 times negative 2i is going to be negative 8i. And then we are going to distribute the negative 6i. Negative 6i times 3 is negative 18i. And then negative 6i times negative 2 is positive 12i squared. Remember, I've got I times I. That's I squared. So now let's go back and combine some like terms. So in here, these are going to be put together. So I'm going to bring down the 12. Negative 8 and negative 18 is going to be negative 26i. Now, I'm going to be very careful right here. You know that I squared is negative 1. So this is really positive 12 times negative 1 because of times I squared times negative 1. So a positive 12 times a negative 1 is negative 12. So that's why we're going to have a minus 12 right here. So basically, if you have I squared, it's going to change the sign of whatever it's touching. So the I squared changes the positive 12 to a negative 12. And then you combine your like terms. Notice that we have this positive 12 over here, and we have a negative 12 over here. Those like terms are going to end up canceling each other out. So that's just going to leave negative 26i as your final answer. So again, we are just combining like terms here. So we're going to put the 8 and the 7 together, and that makes 15. And then we're going to put the 12i and the negative 2i together, and that's going to make 10i. Now, back to multiplication. So we are going to double distribute. So we will take this 10 and distribute. 10 times 3 is 30. 10 times 4i is 40i. Then we're going to take the negative 4i and distribute. Negative 4i times 3 is negative 12i. Negative 4i times positive 4i, well, a negative times a positive is a negative. 4 times 4 is 16. And I times I is I squared. Now, combining like terms, I've got 30. And this is going to be 28. Combining these two, I'm going to get 28i. Now remember, I squared is negative 1. So that makes this negative 16 times negative 1. Well, negative times negative is a positive, so that makes this a positive 16. Alright, that makes these like terms. So putting those together, that's going to be 46. So that's going to leave me with 46 plus 28i. Alright, here we're back to combining like terms. So 10 and negative 1 make 9. Meanwhile, positive 1i and a negative 3i make negative 2i. Simple enough. Hopefully we have learned that when you square a binomial, you will not just square the two parts separately. Instead, 2 plus 3i squared means 2 plus 3i times 2 plus 3i. And again, we're going to double distribute. So we're going to take this 2 and distribute that. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3i is 6i. And then we're going to take the 3i and distribute that. 3i times 2 is 6i. 3i times 3i is 9i squared. Time to combine like terms. Putting these together, so I've got 4, let's see, 6i plus 6i is 12i. And then remember, for this part right here, I squared is negative 1, so that means this is 9 times negative 1. That makes this negative 9. So now I've got more like terms. Alright, the 4 and the negative 9 are like terms. Put those together, and you're going to get negative 5. And then bring down the 12i. So negative 5 plus 12i.